Talk Show. Recorded live.
Hello and welcome to Castle of Horror, the show dedicated to horror movies and awesomeness. This week we're celebrating the release of Drew's Halloween Man versus Invisible Man from MonsterVerse Comics by continuing our retrospective on Invisible Men and Monster Heroes. This week we're looking at the 1940 Universal sequel to Invisible Man, The Invisible Man Returns, starring Vincent Price. Bear in mind, if you haven't seen today's movie, we're going to be talking about it from the perspective of horror fans who have. So warning, spoilers ahead. From Denver, Colorado, I'm your host, Jason Henderson, writer of the Ben 10 series from IDW. With me from Austin is Drew Edwards, writer of the long-running comic Halloween Man, whose current collection, Halloween versus Invisible Man, is now available from MonsterVerse Comics. Say hello, Drew.
Howdy.
Howdy. And also in Austin, Tony Salvaggio, writer of the Victorian Met comic Clockworks from Humanoids, and Psychon, the manga from Right Stuff and Tokyo Pop, lead singer of the band Deserts of Mars. Say hello, Mr. Tony.
Howdy.
Howdy. And also in Denver with color commentary, as always, host of the mom-oriented podcast Pod Moms, attorney Julia Guzman. Say hello.
Hello.
I swear to God, I'm going to get rid of this reference to doing color commentary.
I like doing color commentary.
Okay.
It takes the pressure off of me.
I think by now you're an expert. You know,
I don't want to be an expert.
The legal rule for an expert, like when you can call someone to the stand as an expert in something, like I understand, Ms. Guzman, that you're an expert in horror movies, is that you've habitually done something for like more than 3 weeks.
That's okay.
And by my count, we've been doing this show now for about 3 years.
Yeah, okay.
So you're an expert in horror movies.
No, thanks.
That can go,
I think you still keep us grounded. Good.
All right. The Invisible Man Returns, saith Wikipedia, is a 1940 horror science fiction film from Universal. It was written as a sequel to the 1933 film Invisible Man, which was based on the novel The Invisible Man by H.G. Wells. The studio had signed a multi-picture contract with H.G. Wells, and it so wilds me to imagine H.G. Wells alive and like hanging out with these Hollywood types. And Universal was hoping that they would be able to launch a franchise, and this would do very well. And it was followed by a comedy called The Invisible Woman later the same year. So 1933, then there's a long dry spell, and then in 1940 we get The Invisible Man Returns. So, Drew, you're fascinated beyond all hope by The Invisible Man, and so that's why we're going through these. And so I wanted to get your first impressions, and then we're going to go Drew, Julia, Tony, and then I'll follow up, and then we'll go into the topics. So let's keep the first impressions down to, 30, 45 seconds, and we'll rock on. Drew, first impressions, The Invisible Man Returns.
Oddly enough, when I was a kid, when I first started getting into the Universal Monsters, I actually used to like this movie better than the original Invisible Man. As an adult with a more sophisticated cinematic palette, I definitely have grown to appreciate the original movie for what it is, which is really a masterpiece.
Yeah.
But this movie is a lot of fun. It's great to see Vincent Price, or in this case, not see Vincent Price. And what I liked about it as a kid is sort of what I still like about it as an adult. I'm somebody who loves monsters, and in this case, the monster is the good guy, more or less, for a change. And as anybody who has read Halloween Man or has been listening to this podcast, I like to turn things around and make the monster the good guy. So this movie was very, 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 very beloved to me as a kid because Universal went and did that. So I'm glad that we're revisiting it here for this retrospective, and that I feel like that it not only fits in well because it's an Invisible Man movie, but also because it is, in fact, a heroic monster movie.
Yes, it is. He's out to, in this case, the monster is, in fact, out, as we hinted last week, is out to clear his name for, a murder accusation. So, all right, Julia, I've been fascinated seeing you discover the Universal horrors for the first time. So lay it on us. You've seen The Invisible Man Returns now, and I'm not sure that you've ever seen the Universal Dracula or the Universal Frankenstein.
Of course I've seen the Universal Dracula. I'm married to you.
Have you seen, in fact, the Universal Dracula?
Yes, but we'll talk about that in a second.
Okay, all right. Yeah.
Yes, I really like it. I really liked both of them a lot. Both the first Invisible Man and the Invisible Man Returns. They were a lot of fun, and I'm really excited to be talking about it. And I think the effects are really neat, and especially Vincent Price. I grew up. My dad is actually a big horror movie fan as well, and so I grew up watching stuff with Vincent Price in it with my dad, and so it's a lot of fun to see him in his what the IMDb calls his first horror movie, but what Drew has corrected us to say it's actually his second horror. His first starring role in a horror movie.
First starring role. His first horror movie role was actually Tower of London in 1939 with Boris Karloff.
Yep, there you go. So anyway, great film. I enjoyed it a lot.
Very cool. Tony, first impressions. The Invisible Man returns.
I like the movie. It'd been a long time since I'd seen it. I don't know. Seeing it lately, I kind of agree with Drew. Like, it doesn't quite hold up to the original in a way that I thought it did. In fact, I remember thinking it was better when I was younger as well. But, yeah, this time around, I still really like the movie. I think there's some great ideas. Like, this is another one of those where, like, you could remake something like this, and it'd be, these are the kinds of movies, I think, if you're going to remake something, like, it's perfect. There's a lot of great ideas, but maybe some of the execution isn't as good as the other movies, you know. And there are some really great pieces in here, too. Like, by no means am I disparaging it, but I didn't like it as much as I used to. And, you know, but it's still solid, and there's a lot of great stuff. I think the kind of monster version of DOA, except that it's your mind that you're killing, you know, where you're slowly going insane. I think that plot alone is just awesome, you know, plus the mystery.
And what you're referring to there is the fact that this guy's turned invisible so that he can escape justice and prove his own innocence. But we know that this serum that turns you invisible also drives you mad.
Yeah,
so
that's cool.
It gives it a sticking clock, right?
Yeah, and again, it kind of goes to what, you know, the guy gets really sadistic and say, like, Hollow Man, but it's such a more mean-spirited way. Yeah. And, you know, you don't get the impression he's a great guy at the beginning anyway of that movie. But I think that the idea, you know, those kinds of ideas are really, really cool in this. You know, he has to clear his name, so it's like, you know, he's on the run, plus, you know, he's slowly going crazy, and it starts to affect, you know, how he is able to solve his, you know, his own, like, frame, like being framed. And all that stuff is just really, really cool. I like that. As a movie, still not, into my mind, not as good as the original, but still kind of cool. And how neat is it that, you know, you're working with H.G. Wells at the time? That's right. That's pretty rad.
That is remarkable to think that H.G. Again, you know, to think that he's around, because I definitely think of H.G. Wells as a Victorian figure. So to figure on H.G. Wells, you know, wheeling and dealing, you know, in 1940 is astonishing. It seems like he would be a man sort of either just out of his time or really relishing that. Okay, so my quick thoughts. I actually still like this movie a little bit better than the original, and only because I feel like this movie has a really solid plot. To some extent, the first movie really seems to kind of stretch to try to find things for Claude Rains, the bad guy who's become the Invisible Man, to do, and there's a lot of great stuff in the original. I enjoyed it a lot, but there's not much plot to it. You know, he turns into the Invisible Man and he starts a reign of terror, and then he gets himself shot. In this, you know, you have what amounts to a universal melodrama that would have been right at home on like an episode of One Step Beyond or something like this. You know, you have a guy out to prove, you know, there's a murder involved, there's a ticking bomb because there's an innocent man who's taken this stuff that's made him invisible so he can avoid the hangman's noose, but it's going to drive him nuts. So I actually still like this one better. It's lightweight. I mean, don't get me wrong. It's clearly, it's not a super dark movie. You know, I think the first one is probably a lot darker than this. You know, in fact, I know.
Well, it's also, I mean, this is more of like a science fiction thriller. The first one's a horror film because the Invisible Man character in that movie is very frightening.
He's very wicked. Yes, the original Invisible Man. In this case, you know, just to go into really quickly the ties to the original film. So if we recall, in the first movie, Dr. Griffin was a man who was who was experimenting with this chemical that could take the color out of things, and he ended up using it on himself, and it turned him invisible, and that was a great innovation. But on the other hand, it accidentally drives you insane. And he thought that he could take over the world, and he started to get really sadistic, and it went badly for him. In this movie, we find out that Professor Griffin had a brother who is a good and decent professor who works with some ties to a coal mining business that is owned by Vincent Price, who is a man who has been accused of the murder of his own brother. And basically the movie ends up being
and
about...
we don't see Vincent Price as Vincent Price because we open up on them going into the jail cell that he has vanished from, so we don't actually see him until then.
We actually open up with some fairly charming, almost like Bride of Frankenstein style drawing room exposition where some characters, in this case a bunch of domestic workers, are gossiping amongst themselves and say, isn't it a shame? Our master Vincent Price has been arrested for murdering his brother. He's going to be executed at midnight. I wish there was something we could do. And then at the last minute, there's an escape. And then the rest of the movie is about the investigation that Vincent Price puts out. But isn't that interesting? I think the first thing that struck me, Drew, is that I was kind of expecting that the brother of the Invisible Man would be the Invisible Man, but that's not it at all. It's kind of a surprise that it goes like this.
Well, normally I think that would be the typical thing to do would be to have the generational tie there.
You do have the generational tie because the brother of the Invisible Man is the one who made him invisible.
Right.
Yeah.
No, yeah.
But he's not the Invisible Man, and the brother couldn't be further from the Claude Rains character at all. He seems like a absolute sweetheart.
Well, of course, we don't know what the Claude Rains character was like before he took the stuff.
That's very good.
All I had to go on with that is the novel, so I tend to imagine that Claude Rains was unpleasant the whole time. But yeah, fair enough. Within the movie continuity, Claude Rains could have very well been a very, very nice man before he became the Invisible Man. We'll never know. I love
this pop culture, this notion in popular imagination that scientists and that siblings tend to take on the same profession. That's something you see in the movies a lot. That it happens. It rarely happens. So much so that when it does happen, it's news in reality. I don't
know about that. I know there's families where everybody's a doctor.
Well, I guess, okay, fair enough.
It does happen within families. Stephen King's son is also a horror writer.
Yeah. Can you imagine that?
And apparently, I haven't read any of his books, but apparently he's pretty good.
I'm sure he's been well trained. And I'm sure that Stephen King's a pretty hard first reader. Can you imagine what that's like? Hey, Dad, here's a first draft. Take a look. Stephen King would return it like just bleeding. It would be horrible.
And maybe literally, since he's a horror.
Yes. No. It'd be awful. But okay. Well, anyway, there is this notion, and we saw it in Frankenstein as well. Because with the original Frankenstein, so Bride of Frankenstein is still Colin Clive, but then next came, I guess it was, which came next, Son or Ghost? Son of Frankenstein.
Son of Frankenstein, and then Ghost of Frankenstein, and
right.
then
Son is the son, but which one is Ghost? Is Ghost another son?
Ghost, I believe it's been a while. I don't like that one, so I don't really watch it that much. I believe that one is. I want to say that one's also a son.
I think it's another son. Yes.
And then, of course, you have Young Frankenstein, which is like a grandson. Not an official part of the official canon, but I like to pretend it is.
Right.
I'm as far as I'm concerned, there's a universe where that's part of the canon. I'm totally down with that. Anyway, this is still so it's tied very clearly. They go out of their way to give ties to the original movie, but they say it's been 9 years. It's actually been about 7, but that's a freaking long time. Does anybody here have any reason why it took so long to get a sequel to The Invisible Man going? Is it, that's a long while to
Well, did they do sequels back then? I mean, very quickly.
Yes.
Like how quickly were they doing sequels to?
A lot of the. I mean, it took a long time to do Dracula's Daughter too. I mean, I think. I think they had development hell back in the day, the same as they do now. And The Invisible Man must have been a costly movie to make for the Depression, and the technology that they had to develop just to make that movie. So, I mean, look, I wish.
It's like animated movies now. How they're really hard to put together. They take years and years because it's so expensive and hard to make them. And it would be especially the case when you don't have computers to help.
Well, I mean, that's true, but I'm sure, like, for instance, I have you mentioned Dracula's Daughter. That came in 1936. The original Dracula came in 1931. I actually have, to your point, a treatment for Dracula 2, and I think he literally called it Dracula 2, that Manly Hall wrote for Universal and turned it in, and it never got made. But so they were plotting a Dracula sequel fairly early on, and then abandoned it. Who knows why? Yeah. But
the original version of Dracula's Daughter was going to also be a James Well film, and it was going to have Bela Lugosi in it. And I like the Dracula's Daughter that we have, but I always kind of wonder what that version would have been like.
Absolutely. Oh, Dracula's Daughter is fantastic. I mean, and we actually did, if anybody's listening and hasn't listened that far back, if you go to our iTunes page, we have an episode on Dracula's Daughter, and that was an extraordinarily fun movie to talk about. But actually, I think there's a big explanation here when you look at, I'm looking at the Universal Monsters list, and they're knocking out a couple of movies a year. So they may just have taken this long just to get back around to it. Because they go Dracula 31, Frankenstein 31, The Mummy is in 32, Murders of New York 32.
Let's also face it. Like, I love The Invisible Man. He's in my top 10, maybe top 5 favorite movie monsters.
Yeah.
But he's not most people's. Like, he's down lower. I mean, he's one of the most famous monsters, but he's not one of the most beloved because. It's kind of hard to crack into what makes that cool. And
I think you forget how awesome it is until you actually watch it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Plus it's hard to consider him a monster because, he's not monstrous. Well, except he's kind of like the Mummy, I guess, in that he's all wrapped up all the time. But it feels less monstrous than the monsters that are different, like wrapped up or they have, anything kind of costume.
But he's got, I mean, that's what's so hard. He's got a costume. He has this weird wrapped face thing going on.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That's when he looks like a mummy.
Yeah.
But when he's actually invisible, it's not really a monster.
Well, he's naked.
Yeah.
Also, and I was reminded of that earlier. Because I was reminded of that earlier because there's some show they called like Naked and some survival
Naked and
show.
Afraid. Naked and Afraid, yeah.
Where they're having to walk around naked, and they're everybody's really uncomfortable.
Right.
Yeah.
And so it is kind of funny to think like the Invisible Man, that's pretty much how he has to exist when he's in his element. He's not
necessarily uncomfortable in a modesty way because, of course, nobody can see him, but he's freezing all the time.
No,
and
that's
he's sitting
what I'm
on
saying.
things and scratching his legs and whatever.
Well, imagine.
Well, I even have the line in my comic book where Halloween Man actually grabs a hold of the Invisible Man, not fully grasping the situation, and Halloween Man pauses for a second and goes, "You're naked, aren't you?"
I thought you were going to say that he was like, "Hey, watch where you're putting those hands."
Right.
No, I don't tend to do like a lot of crass humor. That's not really. I don't find that so much funny. But
it's funny because the Halloween Man book is very adult. It's just not very crass. You're absolutely right. It's not rude at all. It's totally adult. I mean, he's investigating murders that are taking place in the whole BDSM community of Halloween Man City. But you're right. There's not a lot of rudeness to it. I actually really appreciate that. Okay. So you guys are from Texas. Well, Tony, you're from the Deep South. We've all had this experience of probably walking in the woods or in a pasture or whatever, and you're barefoot, and it's just pain. It's terrible.
Yeah.
The ice. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Like I said, I was watching, I'm watching this, I was flipping channels, and I was like, what the heck is this show? And then, but then, in thinking about this movie, like, it dawned on me, like, that's the Invisible Man's life when he's invisible, right? Like,
right.
If he has to walk through a swamp, it's not going to be really fun. Or,
what a wonderful observation. Yeah.
It's going to be, it's pretty uncomfortable in general,
Going back to Julie's statement about whether or not he's a monster, and I think it's less true with this incarnation of the Invisible Man, with this particular film. Yeah. But the original, the original Professor Griffin is certainly monstrous in his actions because he's
as close to a monster of a person.
Yeah.
He's a sociopath. I mean, he's American Psycho quality, psychopath.
And then you give him this, and then you give him this terrifying power. So
right.
And that was what was fascinating to me when I was writing my comic. This version of the Invisible Man actually probably has more in common, oddly enough, more in common with the Halloween Man character, because he's
right
monstrous, but he's also kind of an anti-hero.
That's right. It is, and it's funny that they would think of that right away. They get to the second movie, and immediately they're like, you know what? This one he's good. That's it's just like Terminator 2. We're done with the MonsterVerse.
Well, he starts losing it. But he's able to, kind of, because he does do a lot of stuff that's not really that great. But like he's trying to kill the guy who Cobb or whatever, and he's torturing him. He hangs. So he hangs the accomplice guy. Who saw. Okay, so let me back up, because a lot of people probably haven't seen it, since this movie is actually pretty hard to find if you don't have the Legacy collection. Is that what it's called?
Yeah.
Legacy?
It is indeed the Legacy collection. Yeah.
So backing up, he escapes from jail by turning invisible when his the Invisible Man's brother comes and sees him and injects him with the same stuff, and Griffin. And so then he vanishes, and the cops are all looking for him and everything. And so he finds a guy who has been helping out the person who actually murdered his brother, Vincent Price's character's brother, Michael. And he finds the person who witnessed the real person leaving, and it's this guy Cobb.
No,
and so
Cobb is the one who did it.
That's what I'm saying. So the guy witnessed, like, what's the other guy's name, though? The accomplice guy?
We'll call him Alan Napier. He's played by the actor.
Yeah, Alan Napier. His, let's see, I had it on here. His name is, I don't know what his name is. Anyway, Willie Spears. Yeah, Willie Spears sees Cobb running out from where the murder happened, but he didn't say anything because he was paid and promised a good position if he didn't say anything. So, this, Vincent Price, Jeffrey Radcliffe is the name of the character, actually, strings this guy up with a noose and puts him on a table or whatever and says, you're just going to stay here, and then, because you're my eyewitness, and he goes and he eventually gets Cobb and brings him there, and he's like, hey, this guy is, willing to say that you did it, and blah, blah, blah. And Cobb kills him. He knocks the table out. I mean, as far as I can tell, the lights go out, so we're not exactly sure what happened.
Cobb did that, right?
Yeah, Cobb does it.
So,
no, but I'm saying that Jeffrey Radcliffe's the one who's strung him up and is kind of torturing him. Basically, he's not bad, but he's kind of,
All right. Let me appeal to your attorney.
He's twisted, but I mean, let's face it. These guys murdered his brother and framed him for it.
Right. I'm just saying his methods are a little unorthodox, but much in the way Rambo or somebody would be, where it's clearly these guys are heroes in some way. But
I don't know. Batman strings people up all the time and pushes them off.
Batman so he's not a bad guy. He's definitely not a monster.
But I'm saying it sounds like an essay question in criminal law when they say, Vincent Price has walked into the room and grabbed Alan Napier and strung him up by his neck.
But he does try to kill Cobb. He tries to kill Cobb.
Yes.
At the end.
And then second party comes in and kicks the table out. Who is who?
No, I'm not saying he's blameworthy for the murder. I'm just saying that he does things that aren't necessarily super nice.
I'm just saying that actually they're both culpable. It's
Right. But for whatever, yeah. But then he does try to kill Cobb at the end at his coal. And by the way, he owns like a coal.
Yeah. And we mentioned the coal. The coal mining plant. I actually want to get to Vincent Price. And one thing that I thought was really strange was hearing Vincent Price here, and that he didn't sound like Vincent Price to me. Did anybody else have this experience?
Well, no, I immediately thought that it was like the Jack Nicholson thing, where you see Jack Nicholson in the original movies, and he's just like not. He doesn't sound like himself at all. But
You're
then
talking about a movie like The Terror.
But eventually he does. Like sometimes he suddenly sounds a little bit like himself, but mostly not. Same thing here. It's like you hear him every once in a while. You kind of get the glimpse of what he's going to sound like later, but not even.
Part of that is because Vincent Price is extraordinarily young.
Yeah. He's
29 years old here. He has this beautiful young voice. You know, he doesn't have any of this sort of reedy, you know, he's not doing any of the sort of gruesome ways that Vincent Price spoke when he was older. I can't even quite describe it. You know, all you can do is a Vincent Price impression, which I can't even do. But this doesn't sound like it here. He has a nice, rich, unragged voice. You know,
I sort of feel like when he starts having to get more unhinged, having to get more sinister, you start to feel the Vincent Price that we all know start to creep in. And I like to imagine that Vincent Price is sitting there in a recording booth discovering the power of his own voice, because he does have such an amazing speaking voice.
That's true, and it's beautiful, and it's very, like I say, it's very rich and deep. You know, and if you think of him in the 60s, you know, with all those Corman pictures and all these various AIP things and stupid supernatural comedies with Frankie Avalon, you know, he has this sort of ghoulish, almost high-pitched, absurd voice, and there's none of that here. You know, but that's like 30 years later or whatever it is. It's close to 30 years later. So it's funny. It's hard to imagine, you know, is this what we sound like? In other words, if we dialed everything back and listened to ourselves 30 years ago, those of you who are over 30, you know, and who were, you know what, forget I even asked this, because most of these people are going to be 10 years old. So, yes, the difference is horrifying. Okay, so Vincent Price is truly amazing here, especially when you consider, first of all, it's actually him wearing the bandages. It's just amazing to me that this poor guy has to, like, actually, you know, it was him. There's a great point later that we'll get into with special effects where he puts on clothes, you know, and he's invisible. And that was, in other words, in a sense, he's doing all of his own special effects stuff.
Yeah. Well, it's the same effect that they used in the first one, where they did the black velvet or whatever against, however they do that effect, which is the same equivalent to what we do with the green screen now.
Yeah.
But what was really, I got to say, and I'm skipping to the end here, the coolest thing, I've never seen anything like it in any other movie ever, computer or otherwise, is when at the end they have to give him a blood transfusion because he gets shot in the process when he's trying to kill Cobb, and they can't see him, but they can see the Cobb's being strangled, so they shoot at that general direction. And so he loses a lot of blood, which you don't see. By the way, we talked about this last time, Drew, about whether or not the blood was visible, and it's not visible in this film. And so he's lost all this blood. He goes and takes clothes from a scarecrow, which is awesome. Apparently that scene took many, many hours to film. It only was on the screen for 3 minutes. And then he proceeds to wander back into town, and everybody just sees these scarecrow clothes kind of floating through the air. And so, but now they know, because on his deathbed, Cobb confesses after he's fallen from the coal chute that he killed the brother. And so now he's free, and so people are willing to give him a blood transfusion to try to save him, and the blood itself is what cures him from this invisibility. But as the transfusion is happening, you just start to see his veins. It is the coolest thing I've ever seen. It's so wicked cool. You start to see his veins just show up, and then like more and more of them, then the muscles, and then he materializes into Vincent Price. And my daughter was watching it with us, my 12-year-old, and she's like, "That's cooler than anything I've seen, like with computer animation or anything since. Like, there's nothing like that."
It is. I mean, I've seen people do that stuff, but it looks really great, especially considering the time. in this scene. Like the scene you're describing, like I've seen people do it really badly with CG and even some practical stuff, but here, I mean, it's done really well. I
think
especially considering the time, you know.
I mean, the musculature is a matte painting, I'm pretty sure, but the I don't know how they're doing the.
But it just looks so
thing.
3D. It's awesome.
Yeah, it looks nice. It does.
Yeah.
It has a shape to it, and there's some.
And the transition from that into him, it's so much smoother than all the the werewolf effects that they did in the the werewolf movie.
There's another effect that is like that I really thought was cool, which is where our detective, who we'll mention, who's played by Cecil Kellaway. So the detective is smoking a cigar, and suddenly the cloud of smoke creates the impression of Vincent Price.
Well, he does that on purpose. He goes around smoking so that he'll find him, and he sees him right then.
But it's so great because it really does seem to have a wonderful shape to it. There's some real, like Tony kept mentioning about the characters. There's real thought going on here.
Yeah,
that is something we were talking about with stuff I channeled into my story. That is something I remembered, and because I had a nightclub setting as the primary setting. That's something I threw in because I remembered specifically from this movie the use of the smoke. And anybody who's gone to nightclubs in the last 10, 15 years knows that they can be very, very smoky places. So that's
always, for all of eternity, they've been very smoky places.
Yeah.
Not just in the last 10 years.
Not so much in Austin these days. But
I think in the last 10 years they're less smoky. I mean, it's not like the old days where
for the purposes of my story, Solar City does not have a smoking ban. But that scene is so cool, and I love the cop character. I just think he's so wonderful.
He's so clever and smiley and funny. Like even just when they discover that that he's gone missing from the jail, they're like, well, it's as if he vanished into thin air, and then he's like, they said, but that's impossible or something, and he goes, I can't remember what the line is, but he says something like, No, not at all. I totally got. He's like, I got this. And he's got this little clever smile on his. He seems to me to be kind of like Sherlock Holmes in that he seems to really love a good opponent. Like when he finds a worthy adversary, then he's like, this is awesome. Game's on. And he smiles a lot about the whole. Every time he gets away with something.
The cat and mouse between him and Vincent Price is wonderful. It's just. The character actor playing, like I said, he's just so great. Like he reminds me of like what I would, like the Golden Age version of Commissioner Gordon, like what I would imagine him to be like. Not necessarily the version that we have now, which is a much more, film noir, action oriented character. The more rotund. More round, elderly Commissioner Gordon from that time period. This guy's really smart, and that's cool because usually cops in these kinds of movies, and we talk about this all the time. Usually, cops in these kinds of movies are dumb and portrayed to be kind of, foppish figures of authority. And the fact that this guy's proactive, and there's the point where it's like, oh, well, who is the attending physician? Oh, well, it's a Dr. Griffin. Dr. Griffin, why does that sound familiar to me? Oh, hey, I'm going to pull up this file from about 9 years ago. Oh, well, there was that was the famous Dr. Griffin who was the Invisible Man. And it's like that stuff is great, too, because it's real detective work.
Yeah, and there's a real feel of, this is classic thriller stuff where there's it's not Inspector Javert, a slightly insane person, chasing a truly good person. This is more like one of those thrillers where the good guy's on the run trying to do something good, but he's a criminal, and you've got an expert cop who's on his tail.
It's the fugitive.
Exactly.
Yeah, and that's good story. That's always really good viewing whenever that happens, because you're like, God, well, that excellent guy managed to catch that excellent guy before whatever good thing needs to happen. The other person that this reminds me of, and by the way, the character is played by Cecil Kellaway, and he plays this Scotland Yard detective, Samson. What a great name! But he reminds me also a lot of the George C. Scott detective in Exorcist III, which launches a whole new storyline in the Exorcist series, and they bring in George C. Scott as this extremely literate, funny detective who's constantly just sort of murmuring things because he basically he amuses himself.
It's actually funny in the book for that. Not to get too off topic, in the book the reason everybody regards him is that he's kind of off. Like in the book, he's really just kind of a weirdo. But he comes off in the movie a little bit more like he's just kind of, like you described, a little bit more amusing. I think what struck me as well is when you're talking about this stuff is in this movie, because of how it's put together and the characters we see and everything. I noticed there's a lot more character acting as well. Like there's a lot of true character actor stuff going on. With all the people, they're definitely playing their roles, and it was very, to me it kind of dated a little bit because those characters are so of that time period. Like
what do you
character actors?
Like, are you thinking like Sir Cedric Hardwicke or?
Yeah, well, all of even the cops have a character actor cop kind of like all the characters were very.
Well, they feel like characters in universe. They feel to me like characters in Universal horror films because that's how I discovered
a lot of cheesy
characters.
Cockney accents. But you got some real British people playing the main characters, and a lot of cheesy Americans playing the other British characters.
But I thought there was more.
Vincent Price is actually an American playing a British person.
That's absolutely right. Yes,
but there was more of that in this, or I noticed a lot more than in the original.
Do you think that's more of a thing of the 40s? I mean, for instance,
possibly.
If you look at like
maybe that's part
daughter,
of 7 years. Yeah, maybe that's part of the 7 year kind of span that kind of creeped up. Like, hey, we're going to make this movie like this, and this is how we make movies. But I just noticed it a lot more in this particular one. The villains were villainous, or the guys, when he's driving, one character is like. Just all of his mannerisms were much more character actor.
Yes.
Than I noticed.
Yeah. There's a broader kind of stuff. Yeah. Go ahead, Drew.
By the 40s, of course, the Universal monster movies had a house style. No pun intended. When you look at the James Whale films, like that's really the genesis of what all these other directors started to kind of copy, so I think there is something to what Tony is saying is that maybe by then they were working off a formula, so to speak. Only again, I think also with this one though, the one thing that is very unique to this is that the monster is in fact, whereas you always kind of root for the monsters in the Universal monster movies. You really don't feel bad about rooting for the Invisible Man here because he's not a marauding mass murderer like the one in the original. Like this is a guy that's just trying to clear his name and avenge the death of his brother. All very understandable things. And I kind of wonder, I've never read this anywhere, but I kind of wonder if Universal has started to get hip to the fact that people did root for the monsters in these films.
It's possible. I mean, again.
Yeah, I wouldn't.
Recession. Dracula's daughter, remember, was more of a like Dracula's daughter's in 36, right? And so she's more of a hero than a villain, And Werewolf of London, that's 35, and he was basically a good guy, And Son of Frankenstein, the monster. So I don't know. I think so though. I think they were flipping back and forth between. Basically, the monster who doesn't really mean to be a monster. I think you're absolutely right. So, all right. So we talked about, in fact, the monster as anti-hero, and we've talked about the detectives. The detective Cecil Calloway. I should mention who else shows up in this. I wanted to mention that there was a romance in here. The girl. the girl who plays his fiance is, and I'm losing her name right now.
Her name is Nan Gray.
Nan Gray. Anyway, the other thing that I thought was really wild, and this is really stupid for a heterosexual male to point out, but all these 40s fashions are starting to show up. You know?
I totally, yeah. I mean, she wears like some. I mean, they're kind of pushing her as that star power, kind of like we're gonna put her in cool stuff because even when she's in mourning, they put her in this like super fashionable, you know, sitting on the couch hanging out in like high fashion.
It reminds me a lot of like Abbott and
kind of
Costello. You know, all these 40s looks with the shoulder pads and the piping and the various kind of patterns that they have. You know, the women's clothing is getting really sort of flamboyant in the 40s, much more so than in the 1930s. I don't know if that has to do with the shifting of the Depression, you know, because it's still going. I don't know. I can't explain it at all, other than that the 40s fashions are really eye-popping compared with the 30s. So that's definitely something to look out for.
Maybe all the men went off to war and all the women went, I'm going to dress up.
Yes. You know,
well, I mean, I think
we dress for each other.
I think with film, you know, what they really had hit upon by now is that, you know, the films were escapism from the war, they were escapism from the problems with the economy, and so they wanted to give people kind of this high glamour thing that you could not.
Actually, the fashion was also an escape from all that.
Absolutely.
Exactly. Like because you know, a lot of the people watching these movies probably can't afford. You know, even, you know, we talk about the women's clothes, but like Vincent Price, when at one point where they have that dinner scene, has that amazing smoking jacket on, which is very iconic. And you know, the average guy going to see a flick like this, they couldn't possibly afford something like that.
He has a suit that seems to be, it's like a tweed suit, and you know, it's bright speckled, you know, pants and matching jacket. There's some you're right. There's some.
But that's certainly the case now too. I mean, you watch any of these shows where the men are in suits and the women are dressed up, and they're wearing, you know, Armani or whatever. You know, I mean, it's like crazy expensive stuff. So it's the same now. You can't possibly afford what
you're absolutely right. But I think it'd be extremely poignant during the Depression, which is affecting everybody. You know, so. But Drew is right. You would go to the movies. It's so strange to think this is what the role Universal is fulfilling, is you're going to the movies to escape from that ugliness, which is why the reality in Universal is so heightened. You know, and there are intellectuals who don't like that crap, who are trying really hard to launch movies that are more true to life and have more to say, but they don't win at the time.
I kind of wonder, because these were some of the first movies that I fell in love with, is why I've never enjoyed like that very strict adherence to realism, which is extremely in vogue right now. You know, and has been for about 10 years. It's like, oh, we have to make everything very realistic, and I'm always like, why?
People have to be on the toilet all the time.
Yeah,
well,
like,
I mean,
why?
I saw a movie recently where, you know, the people who kind of, even they win in the end, are pretty terrible. And I came away from it going, you know what, I can watch that on the news. Like, I'm not saying everything has to be escapism, and, you know, I watch a fair amount of documentaries and stuff like that. And I watch, you know, realistic movies as well. There's some great, you know, there's some great dramas that are realistic. But in general, like, I just came away from this movie, and it's a well put together movie, but I was like, wow, you know, I can watch
Which movie are you? I'm dying to know what movie.
Escapism can be art too.
But I'm watching it and I'm going, you know, I don't really like that these people are the people who won. I don't really, you know, this. Wow, you know, great. People got away with murder. You know, it was just one of these things where I just, like, by the end I was like, yeah, I don't know if I'm going to watch that again. It was well put together. It was really good. But I like a certain amount of escapism in general. That's why I go to the movies.
Escapism can be art too. I mean, you look at, you know, aspects of this film, and certainly the stuff that James Whale did with these monster archetypes. those are beautiful poetic movies with wonderful visuals in them, and there is a reason why we have discussed so many of these movies on this podcast. They have held up, and I'm sure some of the quote unquote realistic genre films of today will probably hold up. Like, I have no doubt that the Nolan Batman films, even though I'm not as in love with them as everybody else, I have no doubt that those movies are probably going to be movies that last for a while.
I think people will be impressed with Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer forever. For instance.
Yeah, but that's an amazing film. But
right.
It's not a film I want. But at the same time, that's not a film I want to watch every day.
Or, for instance, let's look at the very heightened reality of Halloween, 1978, versus the very sort of grungy, sort of horrible realism of the Rob Zombie remake. And, it's the same story, and yet Zombie goes out of his way to try to make us uncomfortable with realities that we know are there, that real stuff, like Mean Hicks and other things that Rob Zombie is obsessed with. And, that's it's an ugly. It makes you feel dirtier watching it. Now I understand that.
Funnily enough, I feel like the Zombie Halloween is far more cartoonish.
Well, you can say that actually if you feel like Zombie is just being totally obsessed and unfair about the way he treats rednecks, and I think there's probably something to that. But it's intended to make you feel dirty watching it, whereas the original is not. You dip into it, and then when the movie's over with, you exit it the way you exit a dream. This is interesting. There's something here, and I feel like we could probably spend a long, long time talking about the question of what is the meaning of heightened reality in a horror movie versus something like a realism that we recognize from our own lives.
Although, when we are talking about it, I mean, there's still the aspect of there were a fair amount of horror movies they looked like this, and even we've discussed it as far as Universal films. There's political things going on. There's things that they're talking about, and they're using the kind of horror genre to put those out there. Sometimes it's more subtle than other times, but so when it's escapism, it's not always just pure escapism, but there is a certain amount of, you're not in the same world when you're in that theater as when you walk outside.
I've always preferred things dealt with as metaphor and allegory, and I think the Universal monster movies do that very, very well.
I agree.
I was thinking about 42nd Street, which got remade as a Broadway musical, but originally was a film musical, and it starts with the breadlines, and with an obsession with how poor everybody is, and how hungry they are, and how much they need a job, and yet, and that's a movie that really rides the line because it's showing you at the time of the Depression how hard the Depression is. But then these girls get plucked from obscurity and manage to land a job on a Broadway show, and then you're off and running. And that's a riskier prospect than come with me to a land across the sea where everybody's pretty wealthy and even the less wealthy people are kind of okay with it, and somebody's been accused of murder, and let's deal with that melodrama. That's real escapism. That's a world that has nothing whatsoever to do with your own. If you're lucky enough to get a job driving an ice truck and you're worried whether you're going to be able to pay the bills, this is a universe that is nowhere near the universe of people, most people watching it in the United States. That's interesting. I feel like there's something here, and it's a theme that we probably should try to take a look at in the future. We are coming up on time when we should do our final thoughts and riff on whatever else we feel like we may have missed, and also do endorsements. So let's go around the way that we did before. Drew, Joya, Tony, and Jason. So Drew, we've been all over the map on this one, but in the end it comes down to, do you recommend this movie, and what are your final thoughts?
Well, I mean, I think anybody who's listened this far knows that I'm going to recommend this. If you can find a copy of the Universal Invisible Man Legacy set. It came out, over a decade ago now, but I see used copies of it all the time at like half price books or used DVD places. You can find it. This movie's totally worth watching. It's a lot of fun. If your only exposure to Vincent Price is the sort of iconic Vincent Price that we all know, it's interesting to see kind of where the start of his journey to being the horror movie star that we think of. And again, this is kind of an oddball take on the whole Universal Monsters thing, because again, the monster in this is more of an out and out hero. And there's a couple of more like that. The other one that I think of is actually another one in the Invisible Man series called The Invisible Agent, which it might be fun to visit sometime down the road. But just a good flick and a good time. And again, I have a lot of nostalgic feelings for this movie.
Excellent. Julia, final thoughts?
Well, aside from being completely blown away by the effects, because I even think for now they're great. I really like the acting. I think the story is good. I think the acting is really quite remarkable, because I always think of old movies as being kind of over dramatic, and they talk. No one talks like they do now. It's like all very, and it's just not like that in this film. It feels very much.
It's funny.
Like normal.
It's funny you say that, because you can say that about, say Buffy.
Yes.
Nobody talks like those people. So
yeah.
I think that's kind of funny.
Talks like the Joss Whedon.
Right.
People
Or no, the one that gets me actually, because I love Joss Whedon, but David Mamet I am not a fan of too much. I love The Untouchables. Is that David Mamet? Yeah.
Yes.
But other than that, I pretty much don't like anything that he writes, because I feel like it's like they're trying to talk the way people talk, and it sounds so artificial. But anyway, this I really felt like that a good movie now feels in terms of how. I'm not saying it feels like how people talk in real life, but it feels like how people talk in movies now.
Yeah.
So I really liked it a lot.
Very cool. Tony, any final thoughts? Invisible Man Returns?
Yeah, I like it. To me, like, the effects didn't hold up quite as well, even though they did some cool things, like, they tie him up with, they use stop motion when he's tying up the guy's leg, and, some stuff like that. Some of it was more successful than others. I still like the movie. I don't like it as much as the original. In viewing it again, now after having not seen it in forever, it's still really good. And I think there's a lot of really great ideas too. And that's when you see where where it kind of doesn't quite gel. I'm rooting for it more, I think, maybe, because like again, the idea of a guy losing his mind. He takes this thing that he has to take. That makes him become this monster anti-hero, but it's also going to affect him. That stuff. That's all really, really good. There's great bits, great costumes. But as far as like the overall, last impression, I still kind of dig the original more.
Of course, the movie's only 80 minutes long, just like the original is about that. So you can almost watch the two movies, and it's still not as long as Saving Private Ryan. So it make a pretty decent double feature.
Yeah.
I don't think I had watched either. I had never seen this movie before, and I had never watched The Invisible Man, at least not in like many years. So I found I responded to this one a little bit better. I loved the first one, but this one just clips along, and I think it's a wonderful melodrama. That's all it is. But if that's what you're looking for, I think it was really, really well done, and it just sort of shows what's great about Universal. It's funny, I've always been more of an adherent to the Hammer pictures, but as we've been watching these movies, I've come to sort of see what the draw to Universal horror is. So, and maybe that's just as I'm getting older, I'm finding that I respond to these much better. So let's do endorsements. We'll go back around again. Drew, do you have anything to endorse with us this week?
Oh, I got a lot. On Comixology right now, first off, there is Halloween Man versus the Invisible Man, 106 pages, $1.99. It's the whole reason why we've been doing this retrospective. So please, if you listen to this podcast, download it. Let me know what you think about it. On that same note, also $1.99, 60 pages, just released today, Halloween Man, issue 2 of the regular ongoing series on Comixology. Again, $1.99. That's cheaper than anything coming from the big two. That's cheaper than anything coming from Dark Horse. That's cheaper than getting a cup of coffee now. Please, download these comics, read them, let me know what you think about them, and, let your friends know about it, because really, MonsterVerse is a publishing house, but it's a small one, and, every reader we get matters. So please, we want you to download it, and we want to hear from you. Along those same lines, I am going to be at Texas Comic-Con in San Antonio Friday, Saturday, and Sunday this week. I'm going to be selling Halloween Man comics. I'm going to be promoting Halloween Man. I'm going to be doing a panel at 3 o'clock on Friday. Please come to the show. If you're a fan of Castle of Horror, I want to meet you. If you're a fan of Halloween Man, I want to meet you. If you're just discovering all of this for the first time, I want to meet you. If you're in the San Antonio area this weekend, come and say howdy.
Outstanding. The Dallas, you said the Texas Comic-Con.
Texas Comic-Con.
It's so funny because
bigger than Dallas.
Denver Comic-Con just this past weekend. That's awesome. I wish I could go to the Texas Comic-Con. That sounds like so much fun to be in San Antonio. Hit the Riverwalk during lunch. Oh, God, that would be so great. Well, anyway, okay. Thank you very much. And yes, I can totally vouch. And yeah, I can tell you when you're an independent comic producer, every single reader counts because they always, those are your loyal fans. Those are the ones who tell their friends. All right, Julia, do you have any endorsements for us?
No, I'll just ditto whatever everybody else says.
Okay, outstanding. Tony, did you have anything to endorse this week?
I have a couple. In comics-related, although not horror-related, in comics-related news, I have been really, really enjoying Vertical's release of Gundam the Origin, which is a retelling of the Mobile Suit Gundam story done by one of the original, artists, and who's also one of my favorite, if not probably my favorite, actually, manga artist, Yoshikazu Yasuhiko, and he is really, it's a retelling, but it's also so much bigger in scope, in breadth and depth than the original, and it's just, hopefully they make it. I hope sales are good. It's 12 or 13 issues. It's like a hardcover. Each one's hardcover, and it's done really nice. They're on issue. I just got issue 6 in the mail the other day. Pre-ordered them so that Vertical keeps getting pre-order sales. But it's really, really great if you're a fan of giant robot stuff and you haven't checked it out. Gundam the Origin, it's really fantastic. The art is beautiful, and the storyline is just, it's everything you like if you're a fan about the original, but deeper, broader, and that was really cool. And my second endorsement, I've been enjoying, if you have Amazon Prime, which we just decided to try it out this year, they just launched their Prime Music streaming, and I have been taking full advantage of that since I have it already. It was just an addition to your, if you already have Prime. Because there's 2,800 metal albums, of which I think I put 400 in my streaming.
Yes.
And then if you're, there's pop, there's soundtracks. I streamed the Transformers soundtrack, Transformers the movie, the animated movie soundtrack, which is near and dear to my heart, and tons of good soundtracks. There's a bunch of Star Wars soundtracks, so you can do that.
And this is all just part of Amazon Prime. That's just something.
Right now, it's this, like, you can do apps, but I think it's iOS, and I don't have a iOS 6 compatible device yet, and Android. But I've been using it on a PC and just streaming that to my stereo, hooking it to my stereo and just leaving it on shuffle. And there's hours and hours of metal to be heard. There's not bands, not every band or every album from every band that you like is up there. But the fact that, of 2,800 albums, there was like close to 500 that I immediately just put in my queue, and I could get to listen to a lot of stuff that I was maybe on the fence, like, oh, no, I'll check out that album of theirs. It's been really, really great. And there's a lot of really, I forgot how many thousands of albums, and, hundreds of thousands of songs there are on there now. But it's been really cool. I think it's, there's a few kind of quirky things with the way they do the PC app that you use, but I think it's only going to improve. But if you have it, you should definitely, if you already have Prime, you should check it out because there's a lot of awesome music up there.
I agree.
For me, being a metalhead, it was really, I'm like, oh man. I even put albums in there that I have the CD, and then I'm like, oh yeah. Oh, and also as a pro tip, if you have another account, because I have an account that I've had for myself. You can download your Amazon music that's in your cloud or that you get from AutoRip, put that in a folder, and then if you have your Amazon Prime streaming account, you just point it at that folder. So then you can get all your Amazon music, even if you have a couple of different accounts. So that was me trying to figure that out earlier in the week. So it's pretty awesome.
The only so far I've been testing out the Prime Music selection, and it is very, very cool. It's exactly as you say. There's a heck of a lot of stuff there, and you'll not run out. There are certain things that I was looking for that didn't show up, and that's just because they just launched that service, and there are certain labels that they haven't yet added yet. But,
well, I even encountered that because I wanted them to put Deserts of Mars on it.
Right.
Since we go through CD Baby, their CD Baby opted out of Prime at this moment. I mean, sometimes they'll do that and they'll see how it's going to do, and then they'll. That's exactly I really like CD Baby, as they've really done an outstanding job. But they chose, not right now to not do that, and there's plenty of other labels that may or may not be up there. So our band isn't up there yet, but I noticed another band, Destroyer of Light, friends of mine from Austin who are really good. Their album was up there, so that's cool. So, so there's a chance for indie stuff to be there. It's just going to take the labels, deciding to do that. So yeah, it's in its early stages, but there's more than enough music for me to listen to. That's for sure.
That's right. We have Spotify, and we also have Prime, and so I've been comparing the two because obviously you're like, well, wow, if I had an equivalent to Spotify on Prime, you wouldn't need to keep Spotify. It's not quite there yet, but boy, it's
yeah. Well, I mean, you do pay for Prime, but if you're already paying for it, then that's cool. And no ads.
Exactly right.
The other difference.
Why would I pay for both? Yeah, no, and that's the question that Amazon wants you to be asking. So okay, excellent thought. Yeah, this is the week to check out Amazon's new music service. All right, my endorsement actually is something I just discovered today. So two-part endorsement. This weekend I watched The Golem, which is something that I've been wanting to watch since I was a kid, and I never got around to it until right now. I'm doing a lot of research into Jewish magic, and so I was like, well, I got to watch The Golem. The Golem was made in 1920. It's a silent film about a rabbi who tries to defend the Jews of Prague by making a giant clay man to do his bidding, but and he brings it to life with the help of a demon, and it turns out that he didn't think it through, and the giant clay man, it goes poorly. Apparently, bringing giant servants to life just never works out.
How could something have gone wrong? It was such a brilliant plan.
Yes. And so, you know, I was thinking a lot about the Gollum character, and I was actually consulting with Adam, you know, who's often on the show, and I said, I need a character for a Gollum kind of character, you know. So I was looking for something to go with this concept. I was like, give me a good, you know, a good monologue, someone with an interesting personality that could go into this story of a Gollum if I were telling a story of a Gollum. And he came up with somebody who was a comedian I had never, ever heard of, but that you must go out and listen to tonight, and it will haunt your dreams. His name was Brother Theodore. Okay, so Brother Theodore was a guy who escaped from Dachau. You've heard of this guy?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yes. Escaped from Dachau, wound up on the Letterman show doing really, really weird monologues. And, you know, he had this thick German accent, and, you know, like one of his best monologues I'm looking at right now, and it's called The Theory of Quadrupedism, where he was thinking that man could become something more if he would stop trying to walk around and instead, you know, went around on all fours. And there's just a sort of insane darkness to and a sort of also a delightful just sort of pulling your leg nature of Brother Theodore. And then when you think he's pulling your leg, then you think, no, he's actually really pretty dark. It's amazing.
Well, now that you made that endorsement, not the fun. I have to tag on the comedian that my daughter is completely obsessed with, and she quotes him all the time. And his name is Brian Regan.
Yes.
So also, if you're looking at comedy. The comedians, check out Brian Regan. Oh my God!
So you could depress
stuff.
yourself with the comedy stylings of Brother Theodore, and then, you know, bring yourself back down with Brian Regan. So there you go. And that's the most wide-ranging bunch of endorsements we have ever done. But I think it's delightful. Don't forget, this weekend, Texas Comic-Con. Go see Drew. Go check out Halloween Man versus Invisible Man. Be with us next week. We're going to do some more Invisible Men and Monster Heroes, and I think it's time to get into the Monster Heroes, in fact. And, yes, leave comments on our Facebook page, Castle of Horror Podcast. You'll find us. Just search for Castle of Horror on Facebook. Subscribe on iTunes. Leave reviews. Leave comments, and we'll listen to them. We'll argue with you. I can't wait. And thanks, everybody. We will see you next week.
Night.
Bye.
Night.